before you go on, let
Yes.
me do an intro real quick. Otherwise, I will just 100% forget, and this interview will just like start in the middle of us chatting. What's going on, everybody? It is my great pleasure today to present another friend who I have the honor of working with. I don't know if we were friends or coworkers first. I think coworkers, and then we just sort of got to know each other almost immediately as soon as I joined. Um, and yeah, Justin is here. I'm so excited for the things we're going to hear from you because I think you bring so much to the table in terms of like absolute hardcore front line in the trenches, like real support for like big deal customers, mixed with like really deep tech skills. You know, you are a tech craftsman. Like you know way more than you probably need just to do your job. Um, and I think that like that focus on craft and that like genuine interest in just the subject, like the tech world in general, um, is just what makes you so damn effective. But anyway, yeah,
Thank you.
welcome. I feel like
Yeah,
I
that
totally just cut you off to do that, so like I'm
no,
sorry,
no, I
but
mean I appreciate it. I mean,
yeah,
that's high praise. I mean, it's yeah, no, I appreciate that a lot. And it's funny you mentioned like how we became like friends and this and stuff. I think it's I love this. I don't know if this is a story you care to hear on here, but
okay.
I always love it just that when I was in my last job, so I guess maybe to back up a little bit, I'll pick up where I was. So I got into to support essentially doing, uh, I was doing like entry level tech support for, you know, big tech company, we'll say. And I did that for for a few years and sort of just worked my way up from being like true like customer facing, like almost like billing type stuff a lot of the time, which is always fun. Like supporting people's money
Yeah,
is
they're
fun
never
stuff.
like angry and emotional about that stuff like all the
Oh,
time,
never.
all day long. No.
Yeah, never. And then part of the product that I was supporting also like involved like syncing photos and stuff. And like you wouldn't I don't know if anyone's ever gotten upset about losing a bunch of photos or anything, but anyway. So I did that for a bit and worked my way up and I got into what was called a support engineering role over there. And you know, having been removed from it for a few years now, I look back on it and I'm like, oh, I was like maybe at best like junior support engineer. Like it definitely like number one, I didn't have access to the code base or anything, which I guess you don't necessarily need, but it's nice. um, uh, but in doing that, the role that I was in, I had like a ton of downtime, and so I would say like I would come in and work like maybe a couple hours on a good day, and then have like 6 hours of literally sitting there, just like sitting on my hands with nothing to do. And as someone with ADHD, that is like a dangerous thing. So my subscriber list on YouTube of like who I've subscribed to is just like immense. It's like this huge amount of people, and I would just come in every day and just watch everything everyone would post. And your channels was one of those. And so this was when I was first really starting to explore like the whole home lab thing and like setting up a NAS running like first I was running I don't even remember what it was called, some NAS software, and then I switched it over to just like a vanilla like Debian box with running Docker containers and stuff. So I was sort of familiar with your YouTube channel and doing and sort of watching some of the stuff that you'd covered. And then one day I decided I was fed up with that job and wanted to apply for a new role, and I found this job posting for a support engineer for Terraform, and I didn't know anything about Terraform. So I went and I looked, and you had a whole series on Terraform. So I watched the whole thing and
Wow.
prepped myself a little and did the interview, and
Unreal.
here I am. So
That is so
yeah, it's
crazy. I think that's still so crazy.
yeah,
I
blows my mind.
think you're legit one of the first people I ever met, like in the real world, who was like, don't you have like a channel or something? It was like, I was like, oh my God, they might not all be bots. Like I might be making a difference to someone out there. It was just it was great to hear. And I'm not saying that to say, oh, please heap more praise upon me.
No,
It's
no.
just, it was such a great experience when we, like, because you pinged me, I think, because I joined Hashi after you, right?
Yeah, like a couple of months later.
And just like seeing that from you, it was just like I made a difference. And then of course my second thought, and I think I told you that at the time, was like, oh no, like the Hashi people are like watching my stuff. This is a disaster. They're gonna see all my mistakes and like how embarrassing all this shit is. I was mortified. Yeah. Yeah. but it's just like so positive. I just love. Can you kind of elaborate on what that, just because you were right on that moment of getting fed up with one job and switching to another. I think that first job hop for me at least was easily the hardest like thing I've ever done in my career, just because you kind of have to jump before you're ready. What can you just kind of like describe the situation you were in, and like what got you to just say, you know what, screw it, like I'm just going to start applying to stuff. Like what did that for you?
Yeah, definitely. It for me it was you know, on top of just being bored. I mean, you can only sit and watch YouTube videos all day, every day for so long. Like I know that
It
sounds
sounds
like
great, but like yes.
right. It sounds like an awesome setup, and like yeah, it wasn't terrible, but at a certain point, I was like, okay, I'm a little tired of this. And then on top of that, I had some issues with the management that I was under at the time. You know, their style of management was very much like, if you do something wrong, I'm just going to come down on you really hard and make you feel as little as possible, and then you won't mess up again, I guess was the thought. And
That's how
that
human
just
learning works, actually. Yeah.
right, totally. I mean, and I think part of, I remember I'll always remember this story distinctly. I was the technical lead on the team, and we had like been given this new project, and we weren't given a lot of instruction on how to do it. And it was getting towards the end of our day, and all we were told was like, this is super important. You cannot mess this up. So it was getting towards the end of the day, and a couple of people were coming to me and asking me questions about like, hey, should we turn this in? Like, is this good? Should we go ahead and, you know, send this back? And I couldn't get a hold of my management team because they were out, you know, in a different state. And so I told them, I was like, look, I don't want to turn this in and it be wrong. So I'm going to make the judgment call here and just hang on to it. We'll turn it in tomorrow when we get a chance to talk, which I felt like was a decent decision. But I got a phone call a couple hours later, and I was not salaried. I was an hourly worker at this point. And I get a phone call, and I was at dinner with my wife, and I was like, oh, like I got to take this real quick. I go outside, and it's my boss's boss, just absolutely screaming at me, telling me how much of an idiot I am, how I shouldn't have made this call, and who did I think I was? And they were having to miss a concert because of my screw up. And I was like, I mean, I tried to get a hold of you for an hour, and like, I don't know what to
Oh
tell you.
my God.
Um, so it was, yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff that I was just, I got to a point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like it's detrimental to my mental health.
Yeah, it's just like purely toxic. Not only boredom, but then also just this like horrible culture. Yeah, that's a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah, it was not great. So yeah, between that and then the actual day that I applied was something where someone got on to me for someone else's mistake, and I was just like, you know what, I'm done with this. And I literally walked away, and I like went for a walk around the building a couple of times and came back and started submitting my resume to people. And
Yeah.
this job was actually the first and only job that I applied for, so I got very lucky in that sense.
Cool.
At least I feel very fortunate for it. But the actually making the jump and leaving was really difficult for me. I had like, I mean, I'd been there for like 7 years. Like I mentioned, this was like my first like real job, right? So like when I started, I was like 18. And so all of the knowledge that I felt like I had felt like very specific to this company. Like it felt like all I knew was how to work on their things. So it's definitely like nerve wracking thinking about leaving. And you know, on top of that, like I tried to always foster like friendships with all my coworkers. So like all the people that were on my team were good friends of mine. Two of the people that were on my team were like my groomsmen. So like, I mean, like I was really like ingrained in this team. So just the idea of leaving it all was also just like, I don't know, it was this mixed bag for sure.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I mean, that's you're just a good person to work with, and it feels like that is always for it's just always the hardest thing for me too, is like just leaving for, you know, whatever reason you end up leaving for. If you're not a complete asshole, chances are you have a bunch of work friends.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's always that, I think, can also just some friction. It's like some extra friction that can keep people at very toxic, otherwise toxic jobs for longer. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's interesting that for you it was just like anger and frustration, and at some point you were just like, well, you know what, it's I'm so uncomfortable here that just ripping the band-aid off is easier than like sticking it out any longer. Um, that just you brought up something that I'm so curious about. What was, I think everyone kind of has this experience that you're talking about where once they jump, they're like, oh no, like what have I done? Like I now have to learn, like, I mean, for you, it was like Terraform, like the rest of the Hashi stack to some degree. totally new org, like totally new space, like all the cloud stuff,
Mhm.
which I'm assuming you weren't dealing with like directly before that, like, sure, somewhere under there might be Amazon, but like you're not dealing with it. Um, what was that learning process like for you? And did you have any kind of like strategies that ended up working, or how did you approach it?
It's actually really interesting the way this all played out. This was like a hugely like uh, it's like I turned my entire life upside down all at once. And I promise I will. This is sort of relevant, but the I accepted the position here the same week that I think it was like my 25th birthday or something like that. And then I put in my 2 weeks notice the same week of my 25th birthday, and then that Thursday was our rehearsal dinner, and we got married that Saturday. So I like got married, turned 25, quit my job, like all at once. So it was this like
Whoa.
huge like
Yeah.
total shift. And at the same time, I actually had finally gone and had my ADHD diagnosed and started taking medication. So that certainly helped. I mean, that was definitely a big thing for me.
Yeah.
But as far as strategies or anything, I mean, I've kind of always been, or at least for the last like several years, whenever I got really into it with the whole like NAS thing and doing like my home labbing thing, I got really into just like I always like my buddy Johnny always tells me that I try to make things as hard for myself as possible. So like while he and I were doing this sort of at the same time, he was going out and looking for things like Portainer or things like to help orchestrate his containers. And I
Yeah.
was sitting there just being like, oh, I'm just gonna make like a Docker Compose file and run Docker Compose local. Like I would always go CLI based. And like, I started to be like, oh yeah, I'm only going to use Vim. I'm not going to use VS Code or anything like that. I don't know why. It was just like, maybe it was
You are
just I
my
was trying to make it hard
hero.
on myself.
I love it. Yeah, it's like I'm gonna sleep on this bed of nails until it's comfortable. And you know what? That actually works.
Yeah. And I honestly, I think it really did help me out here.
Cool.
I got in doing all that too. I just got really used to being like, okay, I'm going to go look at the logs versus just like Googling an error message, which is what I would have done previously.
Yeah.
So I think I sort of set myself up for success in that way by just doing some stuff, sort of in my own lab, trying to learn things. And I think that really helped me whenever it came to like the whole Terraform thing. As you sort of alluded to, like I'd never worked with any cloud computing stuff at all. Like I mean, to any degree. Like I was aware that AWS existed. I didn't know anything about GCP or anything. You know what I mean? Like I had almost no knowledge of it. But it's sort of going back to giving you a little bit of credit here. Watching your sort of series on it, I was like, oh, okay, I get what this is. Like I sort of understand what's happening
Good.
here.
That's great to
Um,
hear. Yeah, if my channel has one goal, it's literally to give people the feeling, hopefully, of like, oh, like mere mortals can learn this. None of this is actually like rocket surgery. It's
mhm,
you can break it down. And I think if you take that approach that you're talking about, which is kind of doing it without looking for a shortcut of just saying, I'm going to learn, I have to learn this stuff. The only way through is through.
mhm,
Um, and then just taking it piece by piece and not trying to like, oh, well, there's this thing for Docker that's going to wrap itself around it. I think you can really get lost in abstractions, especially with what we do, is like there's always a
mhm,
wrapper for it. There's always a script that handles something for you. And at the end of the day, all it's really doing is hiding from you an understanding about how the thing underneath works.
mhm.
And yeah, I think I just love that approach, that like super practical, like let's just learn these things step by step and kind of trust in the process. Uh, I think so I'm doing this thing where I kind of like ask a bunch of my friends and coworkers the same core set of questions um, to just kind of get different perspectives. So I want to make sure that I hit some of those at least. And this one seems to fit in pretty good. If you were starting over from zero today, kind of given the, let's say, like shift in what's happened in tech in the last 10 years, um, what would just your personal approach to getting into it as someone who's new to tech be? This is intentionally horrifically open-ended, and I'm sorry.
Oh no, absolutely. I think that for me, it kind of comes down to a couple of things. I'm definitely this is it's sort of a hot button issue actually. Specifically, I don't know when this will end up airing, but or being posted, but someone just posted something on Twitter that caused like a whole firestorm over the weekend about working on the weekend and how
Oh,
like young people in tech should work on the weekend or whatever. And
how
I
they
don't know that I
should.
necessarily, yeah. So yeah, it was a whole thing. But I don't know
Huh.
that I necessarily agree with that. But I do think that like for me personally, it did help me out a lot to like have like the whole home lab thing and just try things, because which sort of fed into my second point being that just try things, right? Like um especially when it came down to like Docker. I remember when I first started to try to like learn how Docker worked, I like it just did not make sense to me at all. I didn't understand like okay, so it's building computers on my computer. Like, I didn't really get it.
Yeah.
But just going and like spinning up the hello world container, or then figuring out how to like, okay, well, I'm running Plex. So I need to be able to map, directories onto the container itself, and having to try to figure all that out,
Yeah.
and that then leading into things like, oh well, there's permission issues, or like, things like that. Um, I think just trying definitely helped me a lot. And then I think the final thing on that that I would always say is look at the logs. Um, because it's so easy, and I did it for so long, to just be like, oh, I'm trying to run this command and I got an error message. Let me just Google that error
Yeah.
message and see what
Your brain
happens.
just like encapsulates the message as like, oh, there was some like vague problem and you don't read
Right.
it.
Like something happened, right?
Yeah,
And for so
exactly.
long, I would literally just copy paste it. And then at a
Yeah.
certain point, I realized that like context matters. So like maybe just Googling the error message isn't gonna give
Yes.
me exactly what I need. And I still think it's totally valid to Google things. I still do it
Yeah.
even in my job now all the time.
Oh, yeah. That's
But I
like
think
it's the only it's the prime research strategy. It's totally
exactly, yeah.
legit.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think there's something to Googling, but even going in and reading the logs at least sometimes. Like if you can't find an answer immediately, try to find where the log is. And I
Yes.
mean, logs are there for a reason, right?
Yeah, and so much of the time the error messages like lately have gotten pretty good for a lot of things. So it's very likely that you'll just get something that gets you close, unless it's Ansible. Last I checked, Ansible does not give you anything close to what's actually happening. But it's always the YAML, by the way. Um, yeah, that's really interesting. I like that approach, and I like that focus on just like just do something practical and just kind of like, yeah, it's not, I don't know a good metaphor for this, but it's just you just have to trudge up this hill. You're more or less yourself. That's like, and I think the wrong impression people get is when they get into tech, and I can only speak for myself. I had this, is that at some point you'll know all the tech stuff, and then you'll be able to figure out stuff for yourself. But you know what? It's like a practical joke being played on us all by the universe. It's like no matter how long you've been doing this, the process is always the same. You do some stuff that you know how to do. You try to stick to a more sort of rigorous logical troubleshooting process. You get better at that with time, but
Mhm.
then you run out of what you know, and then you have to go find what how the thing works, what's actually happening. And the last part of that mental map to solve the problem is you always end up just Googling and messing around and reading some code. And it's like you get better at those things, but it's the same process, 10 years in, as it is your very first day this weekend when you go try to figure out Docker on your own.
Mhm.
um it's like it's a strange, like, you always end up being a beginner doing that beginner process, and that's what really matters, is that focusing on just getting good at that skill of teaching yourself, learning yourself, logically troubleshooting through something, eliminating one hypothesis at a time.
Definitely. I think
Cool.
it's something that's really interesting to me that you sort of touched on in terms of like going and reading the code. That was something that, especially when I started here, was really intimidating to me, because I've never really sat down and learned any programming language. I've always been in support, so it hasn't been my focus really. But um, I knew coming into it, like I didn't know any Ruby, I didn't know any Go, and like I'm supporting a Rails app that runs Go code. Um, and so I was sort of intimidated by that. And I found that like even though I haven't taken the time really to learn either of those languages any more than I had previously, um, I think just going and looking for error messages in the code also has helped me sort of get to a point where like I can sort of read Go and I can sort of read Ruby, at least enough so to parse through the code base to find things that I'm looking for. So I think that like if anything, if you don't go out and learn a programming language, at least like reading some to a point where you go, okay, I kind of get the syntax here. Yeah. has been super helpful for me at least.
Love it. That's just great advice. Yeah, you're going to spend much more time reading code than writing it. Even if your job is writing code, you're going to spend a lot of time reading your own code and everybody else's code and looking at PRs. And yeah, I think that's great. Now that you're kind of where you are in your career, what are the things that you find most interesting about your work and kind of like tech in general, now that you're in it and you have this, greatly enriched mental map of like what the industry looks like and what's out there and what tech is happening and that stuff?
I think some of the biggest things for me that have been really interesting that I've learned over this time has been number one, I always had this perception that if someone is like, say, an SRE or something at, Fortune 500 company, whatever you want to call it, that they were like going to be a total expert, and every time I would talk to them, they would like totally blow me out of the water. So like coming into a support role where I didn't really know anything about the product before I started, that was super intimidating for me.
I'm glad I could destroy all of those preconceptions.
That honestly, though, it's funny because like I genuinely thought, I was like, I'm gonna struggle in this role because everyone else knows so much more than me. And yeah, I mean, I definitely run into people who know more than me. But I would say the majority of people are doing just the same as everyone else and just trying to fake it till you make it to a certain degree. I mean, hopefully, a little bit more than that, but
No, it's
but
true.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that was something that was really intriguing to me, is just sort of breaking down that perception that everyone else was way better than me.
Yeah,
And
I had that fear going into Hashi too, for what it's worth. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go for
oh,
it.
you're totally good. And the sort of flip side of that is I also figured that that there would be like way more like exacting standards than there actually are, and especially coming to like an infrastructure role. I sort of would have thought like, oh well, similarly to how I thought everyone else was like the master of everything. I figured I would come in and see these things where it's like, oh well, everyone pretty much does the same thing with a little bit of variations for like, I don't know how many instances they have up or whatever. Um, but seeing like the unique ways that everyone uses a product like Terraform, or the unique ways that everyone does their infrastructure has it keeps me on my toes for sure. It's like a constant, like, okay, well, oh, that's what you do. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, but you're right that it's so that was my impression too when I kind of went from this like sysadmin world where it's like a lot of like very few hosts and very custom setups, and I was I got to bigger and bigger things and I realized, yeah, like you said, oh my god, everyone has a really like janky like custom setup, even if it's using the same like box of parts that like Terraform gives you abstracted away from one of the clouds. um yeah, it's just like I just think it's the nature of our kind of like infrastructure world is that stuff. There's always, it starts small. You start with some really standard 3 or 4 tier like web application architecture, and then it's like, oh, we have this really good domain specific like application reason for why that needs to change a little bit, and that stuff just compounds and compounds, and then you wake up a few years later and you're like, well, we did a totally custom like crazy infrastructure, but there's a good reason for everything being the way it is.
Everything in the world is glued together with terrible bash scripts.
Yeah, at the bottom it's all terrible patch. Yeah, if there's a bug in awk at some point that gets shipped that's like exploitable, like the world is just effed. It's over. It's
Yeah.
Is this your second like tech kind of portion of your career?
I think that's fair to say. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. I'd say like before I came to HashiCorp was the sort of like, I don't know, like me like exploring the fundamentals, I guess, for a
yeah,
long time, and like sort of finding my way and like how computers work, I guess, for lack of a
yeah.
better way to say.
Getting that
Uh,
foundation poured up.
yeah,
Yeah,
and then this has really felt like since I've come here, it has very much felt like it's been more of a like, okay, now I'm like really getting into like the nitty gritty of it and like seeing how things actually work and not how they work.
yeah, on a slideshow. Yeah. Are there any what niches in tech, or even just like kind of sub skills or domains of tech are you interested in and just like would want to explore more at some point in your career?
It's funny because you would think that I should be better at this, but networking has always been something that like I've sort of dabbled in enough to like do my job or like get by, but I've always been like really like intimidated by it, and that extended especially into like certificates and like doing like any kind of like TLS stuff, all that. That was something that always really like freaked me out for some reason, and I think that that's something that I'd really love to like try to just someday put aside and just be like, all right, I'm going to commit the time to like actually learn how this works rather than just kind of piecemealing it together. So I definitely think that that's sort of an area I would like to explore quite a bit more.
That's
And I
cool.
also think that just like the whole like container orchestration thing is really interesting to me. I started to do I started to do a little bit of Kubernetes learning not too
Cool.
terribly long ago, and my reasoning for needing to do it was work specific. And when that reason went away, I was like, I'm good.
Yeah. So there's a lot
uh,
there. It's a fire hose.
right. But yeah, I think it's a really cool thing, and I mean, it seems like a pretty I mean, it's obviously growing in popularity quite a bit here. I would love to
Yeah.
get to spend a little more time with like Nomad. It seems a bit easier from what I've
I feel
gathered.
like even if you even if you're going to go down a Kubernetes path, I feel like it just would pay off to learn Nomad first because it's such a much cleaner implementation of the common principles that they both share.
Mhm.
Like Nomad is just easy to set up as its own scheduler, and it doesn't care whether you have. This video has been sponsored by HashiCorp. No, it hasn't. It doesn't care, like whether your workload is a container or some like legacy VM or a bash script that you just want to run everywhere or one of or whatever. It's just like it's just a much better abstraction. It's a
Mhm.
much cleaner abstraction. It doesn't leak everything out. It's like, oh, your thing is not a container. Sorry. Like you're gonna have to schedule that. Have fun running a second scheduler of some kind in your data center. Like what? Oh yeah, yeah. Kubernetes does its own service discovery. You're gonna have to hook into something else for your other services. Like okay. Um, so again, and I'm not just taking a dump on Kubernetes. I'm not like it's a sophisticated, very complicated but powerful tool, and like there are totally great use cases for it. Uh, but yeah, it's like when you're diving into that stuff, I feel like Nomad just gives you it just like you can start experimenting with that in 10 minutes and
Mhm.
just see what the hell is container scheduling and orchestration. And I feel like naturally just using a very simple abstraction for that shows you why so much extra stuff has been bolted onto Kubernetes, because you inevitably run into like, oh, well, how if I kill off one node and some allocations get rescheduled and my containers move on different hosts, like how do I keep track of that? And you're like, oh,
Mhm.
this is why people talk about service discovery. You like intuitively start feeling as a need like these abstract concepts people talk about like service discovery, and then you're like, okay, service discovery. Well, how do I know where to balance load? And it's like, oh my God, health checking and monitoring is a whole thing. And it's like, then
Mhm.
fundamentally just understand the need for that stuff and why it has to work the way it does. Um, Whereas I think Kubernetes is just like, you have to kind of approach it like a religion. You're just like, okay, I'm gonna just like accept everything that these people are saying, although I don't understand any of it. And it's just like, I'll just learn it all and like do the rituals that they prescribe in the order they
Mhm.
prescribe them, and I will just trust that things kind of like work. And it's I'm not saying again, I'm not crapping on it. I'm just saying it's like the approach that you have to take is much more like faith based and much less.
Mhm.
I'm going to learn this bit by bit and like you were saying before, practically, empirically work out step by step how this stuff works and how it fits together and why I need the next, building block.
Mhm.
Yeah. Wow. Sorry. Rant over. Woo.
No, you're
I get
good.
so
Yeah,
passionate about Nomad. I don't know what it is. Just
it's
love
interesting too,
Nomad.
because like as someone who I've talked about it already, but as someone who really does most of my learning in like a home lab type environment, like that's where I'm the most comfortable testing these things. And I remember when I was starting to try to learn Kubernetes, I was like, well, how am I going to do? I have one machine. I mean, I got a couple Raspberry Pis laying around, but I don't think I'm going to run a Kubernetes cluster on a couple. I guess you could, but
Yeah.
I wasn't planning to do that. So, and I haven't even gotten to the point of setting up Nomad or anything. I keep telling myself I will, but that's been it's been sort of an interesting change too. Of like once I started working here and my role became so much more closely tied to like what I would do in the home lab,
Yeah.
I found my drive to do the home lab stuff has just absolutely fallen
It,
off a cliff.
this is a real problem for me too. Where like as soon as I was, I started the channel because it was just so much fun to continue learning and to dig deeper than I had to for work and stuff. And then when I got into another job where I had to do like really deep Linux troubleshooting and network troubleshooting and other stuff, I was just like, how the hell am I gonna get home and do more of this? But like from the beginning, fundamentals, it's like even takes even more mental energy than just to use the skills. Um, yeah, I don't know. Have you found anything that helps with that? Because it's definitely a thing.
I wish that I could say that I have, but I mean I've had like on my to-do list for the home lab, like setting up DNS mask has been on
Mhm.
my list for like 2 years now. And it's
Yeah,
just been like I sort of like you were saying, like, what am I gonna
yeah.
do? Log off of, especially since we work from home, right? So it's like, what am I gonna do? Is
Yes,
like
it's like you don't
literally
even know where to
swivel the chair
go.
this
Yeah,
way and keep
exactly.
going. Like, I don't want to do that.
Yep, that's the answer. It's a second desk. Yeah, it's so funny. So you just mentioned two things. I actually have a thing that might be interesting to you. I have one. I have this thing I've been working on in the odd, like passionate weekend every 2 or 3 months. I'll like sink a weekend into it to move it just slightly further.
Hmm.
I forget what I called it. It's like it's on my GitHub, so it's a Groove Monkey tutorial Linux Hashi stack, I think. And
Hmm.
what it does right now, and hopefully more later, is it basically sets up a console cluster, a Nomad cluster, um, and a few applications. One is like a really silly short Python application that manually does service registration in console. The other is a container that's scheduled on, actually it's a multi-container application that gets scheduled on Nomad, and it's Etherpad. It's like a text editor in the browser
Hmm.
basically. I thought it was so fun. I had to do it to show kind of like very basic container scheduling on Nomad, and how to run Nomad. It's sort of set up to show that. However, my entire point about this is it actually does the stuff that automatically that you might be interested in, like setting up a Nomad cluster that you can play with, and there's a script in there that sets up DNS mask on all the hosts. It's just like
Nice.
passed in as user data. So you can literally just copy that script and get it done. It hooks it up to console. Uh, Basically, what DNS mask does in that is, um, run as the DNS server, intercept DNS requests, and then just it has a config for anything ending in .console. It passes off to localhost, whatever it is, 8500, which is just the local console agents. Or anyway,
Nice. Yeah, I will definitely have to play with that then.
I
I remember because you did a video on that not too terribly long ago, right? Or maybe
yeah, it
six
was
months
like
ago or
it
something.
was one of the times when I was just like feverishly building it one week, and I was like, you know what, I should just, because I'm always like, oh, like when this is all done, like I will
Hmm.
present it. Of course, I build it over the course of 6 months of free time, and then it's like I don't even remember how I started or the problems I solved. So I gotta just turn on the camera or the screen recorder more
Hmm.
often. But yes, I did a little tour of how the Hashi products actually link up, like how the configs link up. Yeah.
Love that. But yeah, other than that, I can't think, like I haven't really had, the only time somewhat recently I had a moment of just being like, oh, I'm gonna just play with this on my off hours just because it looks fun. And that was when we released the Terraform Enterprise backend for Vault. So you could request and get tokens out of Vault. And so the day we set that up, I went and like played with it a bit. And like I haven't really spent a ton of time with Vault or anything. So I had to like figure out how to spin up Vault on my local instance and, or, on my local machine, and then start making requests to it. And it's really easy, not a plug, but it was really easy. And, but that it like gave me that sort of that same feeling that I used to get in the home lab, just being like, oh yeah, this is just something that I think is really cool. I just want to like play with it for a little bit and then move on
Yeah.
and just let it be its thing.
Yeah, that's how I mean that's funny, but that's how I got into the HashiCorp stack. It was just like the fact they had that dash dev flag that you can just run the binary with at the end. And it's just
Mhm.
like, sure, like let's just do this as a joke, like not serious, don't put anything in here that you don't want to lose. But
Mhm.
yeah, just having that option is so useful. All right, I'm gonna stop. Just this is turning into just a huge HashiCorp ad. Sorry everyone. um someone joins your team, which is obviously troubleshooting heavy, um, and kind of can range, like the problems you have to touch are can be just such an incredible variety of things. Um, I'm guessing pretty much everything that can go wrong has at some point gone wrong, and you've had to troubleshoot these very specific things. Someone's joining your team. What what are the things that you're thinking in your head, like, I hope this person, being a new kind of tech person, knows like these three skills, or like what are those things that are so often neglected by people, or um yeah, just like not as developed as you would like.
Mhm.
um
I think for me, I've got like, yeah, I mean, I guess I have like three things that are like huge for me. The first one
we did
being,
not plan this, by the way.
yeah, the first one being Google. Learn how to Google. I mean, honestly, like, like we were saying earlier, like it's such a valuable tool, and like the difference between, if I'm like watching someone and I'm watching them Google something, and they start to type it, and I'm just like, why no, don't these keywords, or use quotes or whatever it be, like refining your Googling skills, I think is like a huge thing. And sort of similar to that, I would say like becoming comfortable with like just going to a code base and navigating through it. I think at least for me, it's been huge in my troubleshooting skills. In my current role, just like being able to like look at a log, which I'll get to in a second, but being able to look at a log and be like, oh, okay, so that's what's happening when this happened. Let me go look at that in the code base and see like what we're actually trying to do. And maybe that'll like give me an indication of why it's messed up, or at least point me in the direction of where to look. And then the third, I guess this is the third thing. Maybe I skipped one. Anyway, the other big thing that I would say is just getting comfortable like reading log files, because I feel like that's something that took me a really long time to like develop and really, um, I don't know, just get to the point where like that was my first instinct versus, so many times before I'd be like, okay, well, I'll just go try a bunch of different things in the UI or like run some commands or something and see if that gives me a different result. Versus just like, okay, well, if I would have just 20 minutes ago gone and looked at the log, it tells me exactly what's happening. Um, so yeah, for me, those things are huge. And I guess the third thing I was thinking was certificates. I mean, TLS certificates are like such a huge thing that I feel like I don't know, for me, for a long time it felt really like daunting, and like I just like almost like it was like there's just too much here that's too complicated and I just don't get it and I'm not going to try. But someone on my team actually that is no longer on my current team but still at HashiCorp, one day was just like, all right, I'm just going to talk to you about it real quick and give you like a really quick rundown. And he did that, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's not as complicated as I thought, and I just need to figure out a few little things here and there. But yeah,
I can
I don't
interview
know.
him too, actually. Again, I know who you're talking about.
I think you'd be great for this.
um, yeah, that's really interesting. I think, and you kind of mentioned this before, but the network troubleshooting really goes hand in hand with that, where TLS and HTTP, one of the protocols on top of all that networking knowledge, um, is I remember the first time I saw someone who was just incredibly good at curl and OpenSSL commands, and
Mhm.
just had a bunch in their memory and their shell history. Um, and I was just like, oh my God, this is like what you troubleshoot one of these really complicated, weird certificate issues with, where like, because it's not, once you learn the building blocks of how this stuff works, you can start making sense of complicated setups where like
Mhm.
your request is getting forwarded and bounced around a few times before it hits a load balancer and the certificate is there, or a load balancer that hits a node behind it and the certificate is on that node, for example.
Mhm.
Like you can get into weird configurations and you're just screwed if you don't understand how any of it works, or like, yeah, because it's so complicated even once you know how it works, and so kind of open-ended in terms of how people set up their infrastructure, that yeah, it's like just having an understanding of what's happening underneath, and having the ability to quickly get information from the real world that you're troubleshooting via these tools, and having some built-in kind of like commands that you just like remember,
Mhm.
to ask questions to quickly match up the real world to like your theory about it. Yeah, because it's a very slow process otherwise. I mean, it sometimes still is a very slow process, but
Mhm.
whenever you fourth load balancer like instance you hit, is the one that has the problem, then it's like it can seem like dark magic to get to the bottom of the problem. But
For
um
real.
interesting, love it. Yeah. when you look, I think Hashi has an interesting, and I think in my mind, like the best culture I've ever worked in. What for you, having had experiences with good cultures and less good cultures, um, not to make things too black and white, but what are some of the
Sure.
ingredients you look for in a healthy company culture that you actually want to work in?
Mhm.
And what are some kind of symptoms or signs of that that you've learned to pick out?
Yeah, this is it's a really interesting one because going from last job to here, it was, I mean, it was a massive culture shift for me, and unfortunately, part of that is, uh, it took a lot of sort of self reflection and looking. I think actually one of the times that I reflected on a lot was the first time that you and I ever hung out in person at Hex in Austin, um, because it was the first time I'd ever been to like a major corporate event like that. And so like for me, I'm coming into it, I was like, again, I was like 25 at the time. And my previous culture, where I'd been, it was kind of just like, hey man, if there's alcohol here, I'm drinking it. Like I'm gonna have a good time. And so whenever I came over here, and I quickly realized, I was like, hey, actually, that's actually super not appropriate for like a corporate event. Um, but I hadn't quite learned that. So like, I don't know. Hey, I don't know if you remember this at all, but I came down, it was like midnight or something, came down to the bar at Hex Austin, just totally, totally
Really?
loaded.
No, no, I
Like,
didn't.
oh,
Like it
just,
didn't stand out to me anyway.
well, I'm glad.
No, I was just like, oh, we're
Because
all having a good time. He's having a good
yeah,
time. It's a good
this is one
time.
of those things that I've like, it's always sort of stuck in my mind,
Yeah.
and like one of those like things that I've always been like maybe slightly embarrassed about. But I guess that sort of leads to like the greater thing of just like, you know, how other people are being treated around me. That
Yeah.
was something that I didn't really pay much attention to before I came over here, and now it's like something uh, that I really look for. I actually remember during my interview, I was interviewing with someone who's no longer with the company, but he was uh, uh, he was a white dude too. Obviously, I'm a white dude, and he said something to me during the interview. He's like, "Look, we have this culture that we really want to maintain. Like, I think that as his, he was like, as middle-aged white guys," and I was like, "Whoa, now." But, hold the phone. But regardless, as white
Quarter
dudes,
age. God damn it.
right,
Yeah.
we have a certain responsibility to like make sure that things are um, going right for everyone else, I guess, for lack of a better way to say that. And so I think now I can sort of use that to my advantage to a certain degree, where like if I'm talking to someone and I feel like there's this thing that happens a lot with like other white dudes that they'll sort of like elbow you or like make a joke and be like, oh yeah, it's cool, right, we're both white guys here. And it's like, if I start
Well,
picking up on that, like
that's
I'm not
yeah.
interested.
Yeah.
And I've also grown up in tech, like I've lived in Texas my entire life, so maybe that's more of like a Texas thing, because
I'm
Texas.
thinking it's like an everywhere thing, probably.
Yeah. But so yeah, I don't know. I mean, those are some things that I guess like on top of that too, like in my previous role, I think there was like maybe one or two people of the LGBT community around me
Yeah.
ever. And so coming over here and having a lot more people of like more of a diverse background and whatnot has been really uh, great for me, like personally, to like challenge my own unconscious biases, I guess is the term we would use for that.
Yeah. No, and
But
it's
yeah.
true. It working here made me realize like that is not just a bunch of corporate like we have diversity quotas thing, but it's like it's so much better. Like and
Mhm.
coming here, like I always believed that it's better when you have just a diverse group of people working together. You are capable of having way more ideas that way.
Mhm.
And but yeah, Hashi's like the place where I actually saw that. Like, oh, like we're actively trying to maintain this culture and improve the culture um and also like just seeing how different the day-to-day work experience actually is when that stuff is working versus when it's not working.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, do you remember Brian?
He was who was interviewing me that asked me that.
That is amazing. Yes. Yeah, no, I just interviewed him too. And he yeah, he pointed that out. He's like, like as two white dudes, he probably said the same thing he said to you during that thing. It's like we do have a responsibility. It's more than just like, well, if my ass isn't getting slapped at the after hours party, it's between, you know, Steve for
Mhm.
marketing and whoever's ass is getting slapped. It's like we're all, you know, if we're not all like keeping our eyes and ears open for that stuff and like helping people out who might be a little too intimidated to speak up, it's like then we are part of the problem. um not to become too moralizing on this channel, but it is
Right.
what it is.
I got to give Brian a big shout though. I mean that even just him asking that or saying that in my interview, like totally, it was a huge like mental shift for me, even like from right then. Um, yeah. So mad props to
Yeah, you know,
Brian.
he is just an incredible person and happens to be an incredible engineer to boot. It's like he's, I mean, he's in a good place now, but it's a shame when I think I could still be working with him. I feel sad. I feel cheated.
Mhm. Same.
um yeah, that's really cool. uh this is the question I was saving for last. Is there kind of alluded to this before about how tech is shifting and how many kind of like new, you know, Kubernetes like wasn't even around a few years ago. um is there anything that like is happening in tech that might still be small but that you just find really interesting or promising, um or that you feel like is going to shift how things work?
I think that for me, I don't know, like I don't know how standardized people are on like infrastructure as code in general. Again, I'm not trying to go back to being like a HashiCorp shill, but it's just like
I
this.
mean,
I
it's
mean, honestly,
pretty firmly standardized on Terraform, unless you're like a
yeah,
full AWS shop. It's the only excuse I've seen.
for sure. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I don't know. And again, this is also coming from the perspective of someone who like spent a lot of time not in like the community, I guess, of like real like tech people, and now my my sort of experience is in infrastructure. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like as things get more and more to that point, maybe it'll just like, especially with like now Terraform's 1.0 and like some of that being something that's a little bit more like becoming a little bit more mature. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'd like to see that continue, I guess. I mean, I wish
Yeah,
I had a better answer than that, but
yeah, no, it's a
I
hard
think a lot of
question.
times I've been like so long lately. I've been so steeped in Terraform, and part of that's coming from just like going from zero to where I am now in terms of it. I've like completely entrenched myself in like the infrastructure as code
Mhm.
people. All the people I follow on Twitter now are like infrastructure people at random companies and stuff like that.
Funny.
Um,
Yeah,
so yeah.
that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it until you just said it, but you're right. I think I agree with you. I think all of the effects from the shift to infrastructure as code, I don't think we've seen all of the effects yet. You know, it's like
Mhm.
almost like something elastic or like a rock in a pond. Like I think there's still some stuff that's going to get pulled along with this movement. Someone asked, it was like this morning or yesterday, someone wrote a comment on the channel and said, was just kind of asking on one of my Ansible videos or something, like, hey, do you think now with Terraform and Packer, and kind of infrastructure as code and more deterministically like built, um, images rather
Mhm.
than long-lived machines that we go out and configure either by hand or with Ansible and then you know, like or Chef or Puppet, etc. Do you think learning something like Ansible or Chef or Puppet is less important now than it was 5 years ago? And I was just sort of like, oh my God, yes, I think so. I think I see it's less like companies that are adopting that now. I mean, maybe because a lot of companies already use that stuff, like kind of
Mhm.
configuration management systems, but also just, yeah, this move to, and I think it was actually containers that did it, you know, this idea of you have a Docker file, which is essentially infrastructure as code, or at least a build system as code.
Mhm.
You create images that do not change. So you have this concept of immutability, and then obviously you just the idea becomes moving those through your environments, testing against them, making changes as needed, and making new ones. Um, but yeah, it just sort of, yeah, it just dawned on me that that might be another thing that we see is just like the a dramatic decrease in like how complex those build and configuration management things have to be. um and maybe there's other things we haven't thought of yet, like you just said, like Terraform is still growing and changing stuff, and now that it's stable, it's a lot safer maybe for new things to get built around it. Who
Mhm.
knows?
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see, kind of to that point. I mean, Ansible was one of the things that I actually tried to pick up for a while, and really struggled with. And whenever I did my interview to come here, I mentioned that I had struggled with Ansible, but then I tried Terraform and felt like it was a lot easier.
Yeah.
And so I feel like maybe part of what I was getting at is what you were saying about, like, rather than spin up an instance and then run Ansible on it and configure it, like, why don't I just configure it beforehand with Packer? That way when I spin it up, it's ready to go. And I'm even still guilty of this, of writing, like, I've been writing some stuff for Terraform, and part of that I've like been writing like scripts to throw in like user data or whatever, so it runs at
Yep.
instance launch. But every time I do that, then it's like, okay, well, I got to spin this. Okay, let me make a change to that in the autoscaling group, and then refresh the instances and all this. But
Yep.
it's like, well, I could just not do that.
Yeah. Bake them. Is there anything else you, before we close, want to just tell people, especially people that are getting into this, that might be kind of more towards the beginning of their careers than you are? And especially lately, this is what I'm kind of asking everyone. I'm hearing a lot of people who are just like, as tech becomes less of the Wild West, let's say, and like, things like certifications play more thing, and every job ad, although I think they always did this, says, like 2 years of experience required for no matter what it is, bachelor's in computer science or equivalent experience. What advice would you give people, or just what would you tell people about this industry that really want to break in?
Yeah, I am. Number one, I'd say, like, don't feel like going to college is going to hold you back, because I didn't. I mean, I dropped out after like 2 semesters when I was trying to go for like art. I'm not an artist. Spoiler alert. And so yeah, I'd say definitely don't let that hold you back. And honestly, like, something that being someone who's been in support my entire career and all this, like, I feel like I can specifically say that, like, getting in at support is oftentimes a little easier. Number one, because you're not writing code, you're just troubleshooting things. And number two, can be something that like really gets you there. I see it so many times where support is like almost an afterthought for a lot of companies, where they're just like, oh, well, we'll get some people to do support, whatever, it's fine.
Yep.
But I think like a good support team can like really make or break things. And then, like, from my experience, it's definitely been that you can learn a whole heck of a lot about going back to like reading the code base and things like that, and sort of getting an idea of how some of these pieces fit together before you say maybe you do want to make the transition over to being like just a software engineer at some point. And most of the software engineers that I know that or SREs or whatever role they're in that have done support previously seem to do a heck of a lot better, just because they, like, if nothing else, they also have like the end user in mind a little bit more, which I think
That
sometimes
empathy.
escapes. I think sometimes that escapes some engineers that just don't think about, like, well, yes, this is how this should work, but someone's going to try it this other way. Yeah. And like that'll cause errors or whatever.
Yeah, that's huge.
So
that empathy piece.
yeah, and that's, if nothing else, just the empathy of just being able to like work with people. I feel like I sometimes have to catch myself on this, actually, where like if I'm having like a grumpy day or something, I come in and someone submits a ticket and I'm just like, this is stupid. How do you not understand this? And then I have to catch myself and be like, well, okay, maybe it's not super apparent to everyone. Maybe there is something we need to take back and look at this a little bit of a different way. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I personally feel like support is a great way to get into the tech industry in general, especially if you're sort of still trying to find exactly what you want to do. And exactly sort of where you want to end up. I mean, I still don't know. Maybe I'll end up being an SRE someday, or maybe I'll switch over to software engineering. But for now, I'm perfectly happy supporting people and, I don't know, helping make a difference in any way I can, I guess.
Yeah, and secretly growing all those other skills while you're doing it. It's like, just, you're getting paid to learn like Go, Ruby. Like, if you had to pick those things up in a month now, you absolutely could, to the point of being a software developer. So same with infrastructure. It's like, I would absolutely trust you to help run Terraform Cloud like next week. It's yeah, and you can still be an artist. You just can't be a starving one when you're working in tech.
Right.
Thanks so much for taking the time to do this. It was an absolute pleasure. And and reminded me that you know, we just like, this is normally, I mean, maybe not as theoretical, but like this is what normal talks kind of feel like sometimes anyway. So we should just continue doing those normal talks. I won't always record, I promise.
Well,
You might just
honestly,
keep me scribbling when you say something really smart.
honestly, the pleasure has been all mine. Like I said, I mean, I've subscribed to the channel forever, so this is like sort of super exciting for me too to just come in and chat with you a bit,
The
and also
homecoming.
just any right, and anytime we get to chat is always fun. So like hey, 2 for 1.
Legit. Legit. Yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
You're passing it on now. Someone out there will have just heard you say something that like does for them whatever this channel did for you.
I hope so. I hope so.
Legit. Talk to you. Peace.
Peace.